Again, good morning to everyone who's with us here in the building this morning and all those who are at home joining us as well. We appreciate your interest in spiritual things, our worship to God today, and our study from God's Word this morning. We are in a series of lessons that we have entitled simply, Do We Want to Go Back to Normal or Do We Want to Go Back to Better? And we've challenged our thinking in relationship to this story, or this series rather, to realize that it is absolutely crucial that we learn something from this experience that we've been in. We're pushing almost a year. Isn't that amazing to think about? That we are pushing almost a year of the challenges and difficulties that the pandemic has presented. And we have tried to impress upon us in our series of study that we've got to learn something from this experience. If we don't come out the other side of this, and I've told you that I have great hope that what I'm seeing and what we're being told is true and that we're heading in the right direction, and to begin to leave this pandemic and put some of these challenges behind us. And once we've accomplished that, then what? Do we just go back to the way everything was before? Do we just kind of go back to everything that seemed so comfortable before? Or do we try to improve? Do we try to get better? And so we've talked about those aspects. We've talked about how it is important for us to learn something from it. Last week, we talked about the fact that when we come out the other side, let's come out improved and let's come out with greater expectations than we had before. And today, the last of the foundational parts of this series, I want to talk to you about the last element of, is it normal or just comfort that we're seeking? Really, in a lot of ways, for all of us, and I suppose it's true for many anyway, that just when we talk about what's normal, when we talk about what is something that we just kind of have grown accustomed to, really what we're talking about is what has been comfortable to me. And the truth is, a lot of us just kind of like things to stay the same. It's a lot easier that way, right? We can just get into a comfort zone with certain things, and it just is what it is, and it's always the same, and it never really changes, and it's trustworthy and reliable, and it just feels right, and we get so relaxed in that kind of comfort mode that all of a sudden we don't realize that our worship and our service and our expectations of ourselves in relationship to God have become nothing more than just what feels comfortable, rather than maybe what is God really challenging me in to accomplish as it relates to my service to Him. I want to look at this narrative that we had read to us just a moment ago in Luke chapter 11, and I want you to appreciate that sometimes people can put comfort above substance. We can look at what feels comfortable to us, but not look really at what's the real substance of what we ought to be doing. Go back to this scene with me for a moment that Hunter just read to us. Luke chapter 11 and verse 37. There's a situation that comes up. And some of the Pharisees had come to Jesus, and they were concerned that they had witnessed the disciples eat dinner without washing their hands. Now, today that would be kind of scary, right? We've been programmed and trained for the last year to don't do anything without washing your hands for 20 seconds. Sing Country Roads if you need to in order to know what 20 seconds is. We've been given all those tools, right? You can kind of see these Pharisees, but they weren't really interested in hygiene. What they were interested in was what was comfortable and traditional for them had been violated, and they bring this charge before Jesus. Jesus says to them in verse 39, "You Pharisees make the outside of the cup and dish clean, but your inward part is full of greed and wickedness." Well, all you guys try to do is make things look like they're okay, but the truth is you never really think about the real substantive thoughts that you ought to be considering. Foolish ones, did not He who made the outside make the inside also? But rather give alms of such things as you have, then indeed all things are clean to you. But woe to you, Pharisees. Now notice this. For you tithe mint and rue and all manner of herbs, and pass by justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. They felt comfortable in their religion. They felt comfortable in their spiritual practice. They felt comfortable in their relationship with God because they made sure that they tithed of everything that they had in the cupboard. Whether it was an herb, whether it was root, whether it was mint, no matter what it was, they made sure that they tithed, but they forgot about love. They forgot about justice. They forgot about much weightier matters that were more important. They forgot about some substantive things. And they became very comfortable that their religion was perfectly acceptable before God. They became very comfortable that their approach towards service to God was fine, based on a very simplistic idea that so long as I tithe, then everything else will be okay. May I suggest to you that we may be guilty of the same kinds of things sometimes. I attend the worship services of the Lord, and there may be a whole host of more substantive things that ought to be happening in my life religiously that aren't. And I'm trying to trust in one thing that I'm doing, or a handful of things, and I'm trying to feel at ease and comfortable rather than actually trying to grow and improve and strive to build a genuine relationship with the Father and my service to Jesus Christ. My challenge for all of us as we begin to think about coming back better is to get rid of a mindset that says that so long as I feel comfortable, and sometimes that comfort is created by just some basic traditional viewpoints of what equates to faithfulness and what equates to unfaithfulness to God. We talked a little bit about that in our Wednesday night Bible study. About how sometimes we view just a handful of things that we say, well, those are the things that are true signs of faithfulness. And that may not necessarily be the case. They had grown comfortable in their tithing was sufficient to evidence what they were in relationship to God, and that comfort should not have existed. Because they were leaving a lot of other things undone that should have been being accomplished. Do I want to just be comfortable in my religion, or do I want to thrive in it? Do I want to just be comfortable in my practice and my service to Christ, or do I want to thrive in that relationship to Him? That's the kind of questions we need to be asking ourselves. Do I want to do enough, or do I want to go the second mile with my Savior? Do I want to just fit a handful of norms that religious folks have generally accepted as being things that evidence that you're a child of God? Or do I want to try to go above and beyond those normal expectations, those comfort zones that men have created? Because if we're going to go back to better personally, if we're going to go back to better congregationally, then we've got to quit thinking about what's just comfortable, or maybe in some senses a better phrase would be what just simply has worked for us for a long period of time. And ask ourselves some sobering questions about, is that really what is better, and or is it really what's best in my service to God? Sometimes we put comfort above substance, and we don't become the better servant we could. Sometimes we're comfortable because we're comfortable. I didn't know how else to say that, by the way. I didn't like it when I put it on the chart, but I didn't know how else to phrase that. But it's true, right? Go back into the Old Testament for a minute. In the book of Amos. Amos chapter 6. Sometimes we can get comfortable and we just kind of like it there. We become at ease, that's the phrase that's used here in this text, because we just kind of are comfortable in the way things are. Woe to you, though, is what the prophet says in verse 1 of Amos chapter 6. Woe to you who are at ease in Zion and trust in Mount Samaria, notable persons in the chief nation to whom the house of Israel comes. Go over to Calneh and see. And from there go to Hamath the Great, then go down to Gath of the Philistines. Are you better than these kingdoms? Or is their territory greater than your territory? stop for a minute. Woe to you who've got knees in Zion. You're not being honest with yourselves about what's really happening among the nation. Go take a peek and look around and see what's really going on among these other nations. Take a look around you and recognize that there are some things that are happening in Zion among God's people that need changed and corrected. They needed to get better, but because they had just become so comfortable and so at ease and so relaxed in the way things were, they weren't looking to improve. They weren't looking to get any better. Woe to you who put far off, verse 3, the day of doom, who caused the seat of violence to come near, who lie on beds of ivory, stretch out on your couches, eat lambs from the flock and calves from the midst of the stall, who sing idly to the sound of stringed instruments and invent for yourselves musical instruments like David, who drink wine from bowls and anoint yourselves with the best ointments, but are not grieved for the affliction of Joseph. Friends, sometimes comfort and ease can lull us into a complacency that we don't see things the way that they really are. We can become so at ease and comfortable in our religious practice, in my personal convictions, in the way that I serve God. We can become so comfortable and at ease in it that we put the blinders on. And we don't really see the reality of the growth that needs to be taking place. We don't see the reality and need of the challenges we need to be setting before us to improve and move forward. You can just kind of see them sitting back on their couches and they're drinking their wine from bowls. All was well in their minds. You know, it's a challenge, right? There's a challenge that happens with us in our walk with God because we challenge the idea. We've got to understand the idea of godliness with contentment is great gain. And so there is a level in a sense that we need to be content. Recognize sometimes we're going to make mistakes. There are going to be things we have to repent of. There are going to be things that we need to seek to improve. And so recognize our fallibility. There's a difference between kind of that kind of content to recognize those things, but there's also a contentment that's false hope. There's also a contentment that's based on just, well, everything's comfortable to us. And that comfort is derived from whatever traditions that we have created to make us feel comfortable. I'm trying not to preach the coming sermons here. And if you see some hesitance in me, I got to leave something for another day. But you just think about the kinds of things. Let's be honest for a minute here, right? Let's just be honest with each other. And I'm included in this list in some ways. There's a piece of all of us that would probably just like to see us be back in this building at 9:30 for Bible study, be back in this auditorium at 10:15 after that for worship, be back in this building at 6:30 on Sunday night for worship. And because that was what? It was normal and it was comfortable. We've got to also think about purpose, right? Sometimes we can become so comfortable that we forget that there ought to be purpose behind every one of those. Now, here's I know what's going on in your mind. Brian's come with some great change, and he's going to say, no, we don't need to have Bible study. Nope. Take that out of your mind. What I'm saying is, don't allow for that mindset to overwhelm us so much that that's all we're really looking for. All I want is just to get back to that 9:30, 10:15, 6:30, 7 on Wednesday mode. Because if we're only striving just to get back to the mode, we're not going to get any better. If we're only thinking about what's comfortable, and I'll feel better about my religion, I'll feel better about my service to God if I can just get back to those ways we were doing things that were comfortable, then I'm afraid we'll miss out on the opportunity to come back better And we'll examine, Lord willing, next week the idea of how to put purpose behind every one of those decisions. To put purpose and meaning behind every choice that we make. To make sure it's exactly what the congregation, exactly what we as individuals need to get better and stronger and more faithful in our service to God. The days of the prophet Amos, they had become comfortable and they shouldn't have been. There were lots of things that they needed to make improvements on. Let's not become so comfortable that we don't see where we can make improvements in various areas. Number 3, comfortable may hinder a walk of faith. Go over into Matthew chapter 14 with me for a minute. Matthew chapter 14 and verse 22. Matthew chapter 14, verse 22. Immediately, you'll recognize this scene here in just a moment, I'm sure. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And now when evening came, he was alone there. But the boat was now in the middle of the sea, tossed to the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went to them, walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a ghost," and they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." So he said, "Come." And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. When he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." Did you notice what Jesus said about Peter that caused him to sink? What Jesus said about Peter's reason why he was sinking is he said, "Oh, you of little faith." Peter for a moment thought and had reservations and had a doubt as to whether or not the boat would have been more comfortable than trying to stand out here and walk with Jesus. You love his initial courage, right? You love his initial courage to look to Jesus, and if that's really you, Lord, then command me to come out there and walk with you. All Jesus says is come, by the way. And that was enough for Peter to leave the boat and to begin to walk by faith, but then the doubt set in. His faith began to shrink, and the confidence when that wind began to make those waves roll. I heard one preacher one time illustrate that if you could imagine the visual of that, and as the waves would roll, right, and you're standing on that water, and so it's quite potential that Jesus is easily in view and then not as quite as easily in view, and then easily in view and not quite as easily in view. Now they were close enough to do what? I believe to reach out to each other. But friends, I'm simply trying to encourage us to realize something here. When we challenge ourselves to do great things by faith, and to step out of the boat of comfort and step onto the waters with Jesus by faith, there are going to be times where you have doubts about that. And when those doubts set in, I have to ask a very sobering and honest question. Am I having doubts because maybe our choice was wrong? And that could be, by the way. I'm ready. Anytime you Anytime you talk about making changes or doing something different, or I absolutely admit that you got to be cautious about that. You've got to ask all the authority questions about that. You've got to make sure it fits the biblical narrative. You got to do all the due diligence. And it's quite possible you might make a change, or you might start to do something different, and you may have to realize that wasn't wise, or that didn't work. But I think we might also want to stop, at least consider for a moment, that sometimes when you do things differently, you get out of what is comfortable and start thinking about things a little differently, or doing things just a little differently. The doubt sets in, not because it's wrong, but the doubt sets in because I don't have faith to allow it to fulfill its purpose. The doubt sets in because I'm more comfortable in the old way. I'm more comfortable doing things the way I always did them, and so I'm constantly looking back towards the boat. And so I simply encourage all of us to recognize when we're challenged with opportunity to make changes for the better, to do things potentially differently than we have for the better, then let's act on faith. Let's secure ourselves in the biblical authority to take action in the manner that we are. And then let's not give in to the lack of comfort for a moment. The minute he was willing to rejoin himself to Jesus, salvation came to him. May I actually suggest to you this thought? That we can actually be deceived as to where the true comfort is found. May I suggest to you that inside that boat may not have been all that more comfortable than walking on the water with Jesus. Remember, they're in the midst of the sea and they're in a contrary wind. They can't make that boat go anywhere. It's being tossed by the waves. And maybe it was pretty easy to convince themselves in some fashion that the boat was more comfortable than walking on water. My suggestion is that we need to learn to be comfortable wherever Jesus is. Right? The boat may have appeared to be more comfortable. The boat may have appeared to have been safer. The boat may have appeared to be where you wanted to be. I'm suggesting to all of us that wherever Jesus is, that's where I need to be comfortable. Wherever Jesus leads me, whatever he challenges me to change, whatever he encourages me to do, and if he challenges me to step out of the comfortable and walk on water to know true comfort with his hand, then I need to be willing to do that. And be honest about the things that maybe in my life spiritually, personally, congregationally, in whatever fashion you want to consider them, that I maybe have just become comfortable. It just feels good. It just feels easy. It feels right. But maybe Jesus is actually challenging us to think differently, to think more purposefully, and to do greater things than we've ever been able to accomplish before. And it's going to take a willingness to walk by faith. It's going to take a willingness to commit to a purpose of faith that wants to get better. Because if we're just consumed with what's comfortable, then the improvement and the betterment and the growth in faith that I would hope all of us would desire may be neglected. And so let me ask this question. How do I respond when Jesus asks me to leave what is comfortable? What am I going to do? When I begin to think more deeply than I ever have before, when I challenge myself to ask the sobering question, do I just want to tithe every week, or do I want to have legit, serious relationship with the Father that commits to love and justice and all the substance that goes with being a child of God? When Jesus challenges me to leave that comfortable boat because it's not all as comfortable as you think it is and walk by faith on the water, how am I going to respond? When Jesus says, let's get better, note with me John chapter 4, verse 19. Jesus has encountered a woman at a well. She becomes noted as that in Scripture. In fact, many of you may have a little paragraph notations in your Bible and might even say the woman at the well above this paragraph. Jesus has been having a conversation with her, and she says in verse 19, "Sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain. You Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one ought to worship." Now just stop and think about that in the context of our study this morning for a minute. She says, our fathers have been perfectly content and comfortable to worship God right here in the mountain. You Jews have been perfectly content and comfortable to worship God down there in Jerusalem. Jesus says to her, verse 21, "Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will wander in this mountain, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem, worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews, but the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship Him. God is spirit, and those who worship Him must worship Him in spirit and truth." Jesus just says to this woman at the well and to every single one of us, worship to God isn't about what feels comfortable. Worship to God isn't based on location. Worship to God isn't about it fits the scheduling that we're accustomed to. Worship to God isn't about all the things that have made us feel comfortable that we're doing the right things. My point, friends, is simply this. We make the mistake sometimes of convincing ourselves that our worship to God is what it ought to be, but we're basing that on the wrong kinds of concepts. They felt their worship was right because of where they were doing it, in the mountains of Samaria. The Jews felt like they were doing the things right in worship to God because they were doing it in Jerusalem. Jesus says a day is coming, folks, to this woman at the well. A day is coming where folks are going to have to realize that it's not where you feel comfortable that makes the worship correct. It's whether or not you are willing to put spirit and truth behind that worship to God. So if we're challenged to ask ourselves, as we begin the process of trying to come out of this pandemic, again, I've said before, I'm not saying that we're out of this yet, and I'm not saying that's happening tomorrow. But as we do slowly grow out of this situation that has dominated our thinking, it's dominated our behaviors, it's dominated our minds. Quite frankly, it has ruined the soul and spirit and mind of so many. And as we begin the process and hope to be able to come out, then let's come out better, not comfortable. If, and I'm not trying to accuse anybody of anything, but if my religion was simply at ease in Zion, then let's come out better than that. Let's not just go back to comfortable. Let's find ways to go back better. And if that means asking ourselves about how we conduct worship, and I don't mean let's add unscriptural things by that. I mean, challenging us to genuinely focus on spirit and truth. And how do we do that? How do we commit to that purpose and fulfill that purpose? And not just simply say, I know I'm in next week's lesson, I apologize. But not just say to ourselves, well, we'll get back to spirit and truth when we get back to our 4 services a week. Right? Is that going to be it? Could we not ask more of ourselves than that? Could we not ask more of ourselves than just simply getting back to a schedule? I believe we can. I believe we can ask better questions than that. I think we can challenge ourselves to think beyond just what will be comfortable, because I trust me, I get it. I would feel much more comfortable if it was just a matter of pure comfort to just go back. Let's just get back. I can get back into my old routine that I've known well for practically 30 years. 2 Bible study preps, 2 sermon preps. When it comes to that kind of thing, that aspect of my work, just kind of get back to that. But I've got to ask the question, is that comfort better? Does it really meet the purpose of spirit and truth? And if the conclusion is that yes, that's what works to lead us to the right spirit and truth, then that's good, right? But let's ask the questions. How do I respond when Jesus says, are you just comfortable, or do you want to get better? Because if we're just comfortable, then it's going to be hard to grow, and it's going to be hard to even ask questions that might help us get better. And I hope that as we get into what I will call the practical side of this series, probably 2 more lessons. But when we get into the practical application of these 3 things that we've talked about foundationally, about learning, about improving and raising expectations, and about cautioning against the idea of just being comfortable, I hope that we can find some practical ways to talk about those things as we move forward. But this morning, maybe you're subject to the gospel in some way, and we could help you consider that. We're going to ask the question in our song this morning, are you washed in the blood? Have you come to Jesus for the cleansing power? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? If you've once been and need to return to Him, we'd be glad to pray for you. Or if you've never known the remission of sins, you've never found the salvation